The Oscars. The film world's annual dose of glitz, glamour, self-congratulation, and oftentimes horrendous cinematic takes by Hollywood at large. But to be fair, I do think it's good to have a barometer of quality in filmmaking, even if that barometer just doesn't work half the time, and needs a good kicking. And so in that spirit, I've decided to try to redress the balance in some small way, and I've put together my top 5 best films to lose the Best Picture category at the Academy Awards. And so, the Oscar does not go to... Number 5, Raging Bull. A beautiful movie that seemed to crystallise Martin Scorsese's visual language. The slow-motion shots, the bloodied bodies looking more like classical Catholic artworks than a sports movie, all in service of telling the story of troubled Italian-American boxer Jake LaMotta. Scorsese's record is a big example of how the Oscars regularly get it wrong. Despite being one of America's most beloved filmmakers, his movies had a famously long losing streak, with other losses including classics such as Taxi Driver and Goodfellas. But the film that won this year was Ordinary People. I've seen it and it's a decent film. It's a film full of actors acting the hell out of a really talky family drama, and boy do they rip up that scenery. But in a year when The Elephant Man and Raging Bull were released, there's no way this one should have taken home the Oscar. Number 4, Citizen Kane. So I won't lie to you and pretend that I've watched all the movies that were nominated for the 1941 Best Picture Oscar, but I've seen a few. The Maltese Falcon is obviously a classic. It does everything you would want an American 40s film noir to do. And I'm not here to hate on How Green Was My Valley. It's a great film, and yes, maybe this did deserve to win Best Picture. But Citizen Kane. The title itself has become a byword for excellence in filmmaking, so I felt like this one had to be included by default. And what can I tell you about this film? Reporters clamour to try to decipher the meaning of the last words of a larger-than-life publishing magnate, Charles Foster Kane, and his whirlwind life is examined in flashbacks. For me, it's the visual language that makes it. The visionary use of deep focus, the precise arrangement of every frame. It's one of a handful of films that are genuinely in the conversation for the greatest of all time. Number 3, Sunset Boulevard. To be fair to the Academy, they did give an Oscar to Herman Mankiewicz, the guy who wrote Citizen Kane. I guess they're not always wrong. And interestingly, his brother Joseph Mankiewicz won multiple Oscars in 1950, including Best Picture, for his film All About Eve. However, this was also the year that Sunset Boulevard was nominated. This is another film that is often cited as one of the greatest of all time. And while I don't think it's quite on a par with Citizen Kane, I do think it deserved the Oscar that year. To me, it felt like an American reinterpretation of Charles Dickens' Great Expectations, as the protagonist tries to make his way in the world, while simultaneously being propped up and held back by his wealthier benefactors. It also gets at the grit and darkness that lies underneath the sheen of Hollywood. Maybe this is the reason why the Academy didn't like it. Number 2, The Tree of Life. So this one is quite personal to me, I suppose. For me, The Tree of Life is the greatest film ever made, by the greatest filmmaker there has ever been. Visually, it's on par with the great Renaissance paintings of Botticelli and Raphael, and the story of this small-town Texan family beset by personal tragedy, being wrapped up in a retelling of the birth of the universe itself, is bold and beautiful beyond words. No hate towards the artist, which ultimately went on to win that year. It was cool to see a black and white silent movie ripping it up in 2011. But when you have a brilliant auteur take his personal tragedy and sing it to the high heavens in the way that Malick does, how can you not see? The Tree of Life was the best picture that year, and possibly the best picture ever. Number 1, The Social Network. So before I list my grievances about this result, I should start by saying that 2010 was a packed out year in terms of quality films. Black Swan, Inception, True Grit. This was a year in which some of our greatest contemporary filmmakers were making arguably the greatest films of their careers. And quite possibly, the jewel in this crown was David Fincher's The Social Network, the story of the rise and rise of tech giant Facebook, and the dark origin story surrounding its founder Mark Zuckerberg, complete with inch-perfect direction, Shakespearean levels of betrayal, and the most brilliantly penned scripts by Aaron Sorkin. And yet the film that won Best Picture that year? The King's Speech is a totally fine film. My parents loved it. But as with Birdman and The Artist, I think it was really the actors' fraternity that voted for this. A story of someone struggling to produce a great performance. So yeah, it's pretty unforgivable to me that the man who would go on to create Cats beat the great David Fincher to Best Picture and Best Director that year. So there you go, that's my 2 cents. I would like to thank the Academy for their hilariously bad choices, and I'd like to thank you all for watching. Please let me know what you think were the worst calls in Oscar history, and I hope you like, I hope you subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.